So in battle analysis, we are coming up on the Battle of Cato Nemoidia. Now, many of you know Cato Nemoidia as the homeworld of the Trade Federation, and I figured this is a good chance to sort of dive into what the Trade Federation is and the role it plays in the Clone Wars. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So many of us are probably familiar with the Trade Federation more in the context of the invasion of Naboo and less in the context of the Clone Wars itself. The Trade Federation is, at its core, a major trade organization in the galaxy. In fact, it's one of the largest, operating primarily in the Outer Rim, putting it in a lot of the seedier places of the galaxy. If you've seen anything about the Separatist Crisis or the Trade Federation's military, you know that this is why they have a military to begin with. After all, we see the Trade Federation, a private corporation, carry out a planetary invasion during the Naboo Crisis. So, how do they get this military? Well, it comes down to a relaxing of regulations on corporate defense forces due to the unpoliced nature of the Outer Rim. Basically, operating in the Outer Rim was seen as such a liability that the only way to convince companies like the Trade Federation to operate in those regions was to give them the license they needed to build massive defense forces to protect their large cargo ships. At the core of the Trade Federation was a massive fleet of Lucrehulk-class freighters. These massive cargo ships were some of the largest ships in the galaxy at the time, and were capable of carrying vast amounts of resources from one planet to another, making them really good trade ships. Think of them like modern-day container ships. Interestingly, the Trade Federation also had a seat in the Galactic Senate. Within the Galactic Republic, the Trade Federation actually did hold a seat before the outbreak of the Naboo Crisis, which led to the Clone Wars ultimately. The Trade Federation was seen debating their cause in the Senate surrounding the Naboo Crisis, so they obviously did have the Senate seat back then, and they would retain that Senate seat into the start of the Clone Wars. Now, I hear what you're thinking. The Trade Federation is clearly on the side of the CIS. What are they still doing in the Senate? Well, the official position of the Trade Federation is that Newt Gunray, the sort of excused viceroy who led Trade Federation forces during the invasion of Naboo, broke off and formed a splinter faction, a separate entity using a lot of the resources of the Trade Federation, which had then gone off and sided with the Separatists. Now, obviously, this is just what they're saying. The Trade Federation as a whole probably did support the Separatist cause, since it seemed to be more in favor of the free trade regulations that the Trade Federation was campaigning for, but that's beside the point. The point is, a large portion of the Trade Federation's fleet was sort of handed over to the Separatist military, along with a large portion of their ground forces. It's obvious that the Trade Federation's defense force forms the core of the Separatist military, as many of the B-1 battle droids were Trade Federation property, and the mainstay armored vehicles of the CIS are things like the armored assault tank, which were ultimately inherited from the Trade Federation. Even their massive cargo ships, the Lucrehulk-class cargo ships, were ultimately converted into battleships, their immense size allowing them to have vast hangars filled with vulture droids, and large computing centers to handle droid control, which is something we see them do during the invasion of Naboo. So the Trade Federation ended up in this really weird spot, where technically the Trade Federation tried to remain neutral, if not a party to the Galactic Republic. Well, in a very practical sense, their resources and military equipment were being used to fund and supply the CIS. That put representatives of the Trade Federation on Coruscant in a very tricky spot. They were regularly accused of being Separatist sympathizers, and under the surface they truly were, but in public they had to put off the appearance of being neutral. Even during incidents like the blockade of Pantoro, where the Trade Federation were ultimately working to the Separatist interests, they had to try to spin the story to make the Trade Federation seem neutral. Now, the Trade Federation's long history, however, did come to an end with the end of the Clone Wars, as the Trade Federation, like many of the corporations that sided with the CIS at the start of the war, was nationalized by the new Galactic Empire and would eventually become part of the Imperial Trade Network that supplies the galaxy under the reign of the Galactic Empire. Many of the resources, military equipment, and ships built or operated by the Trade Federation would end up in scrapyards in the coming years, and that would ultimately end up wiping their legacy from the galaxy by the time of the Battle of Yavin, with only a few little bits of the Trade Federation still floating around. But, like I mentioned, many of you probably know the Trade Federation from their invasion of Naboo, which is where they took prominence, where they were acting almost like the Separatists before the start of the Separatist Crisis. If you'd like to learn more about the Battle of Naboo or the Naboo Crisis, I'll leave a link up here to my video on that. And I'd like you to let me know down in the comments whether you think the Trade Federation's military was actually built for self-defense. Do you think they really needed all these basically warships and this massive army of battle droids? Or do you think they knew well in advance that they were going to be carrying out some seedier operations like invasions of independent planets and such? And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in Star Wars, you can let me know down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.